Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation on starting a business in Arkansas. We're with the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center, along with our, partners from Arvest Bank and Wright, Lindsey, Jennings. So to kick this off, Lori Lieblong, who's business consultant in our center, will start the presentation and will be followed by Cal Rose from Wright, Lindsey, Jennings, and Alicia Funa from Arvest Bank. This is being recorded and will be posted on our website. One thing I would like to encourage you to do, please, is in the next couple of days, you will receive a survey from via your email. And it's really helpful for us if you take a few minutes and fill that out, because it gives us an idea of the kinds of information that you really need help with, and gives us a great leg up on planning our future presentations and webinars. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to Lori.
Okay, great. I'm going to move over here. I think everybody can see me in the Zoom, and then everybody in the room can. We're going to hold our questions till the very end. You can feel free, for those of you on the Zoom, to put them in the chat whenever you like, but we're going to hold them till the end. So I'll go ahead and get started. So we're all here for starting a business in Arkansas. I presume you either want to start a business or have already started a business or have one existing, and maybe you're looking for a little bit better roadmap on how to get to the next level. So we're excited you're here. Just a little bit about us. We are part of a national network of organizations that are on host university institutions across the country. So we've got one at our state headquarters in Little Rock, and there's one in Jonesboro ASU. We're funded by the SBA. And funded by the University of Arkansas and other funding partners. A little bit about us. So you're here, you know about our trainings. We also offer other training on marketing, finance, and a variety of other topics. So I would encourage you to continue to check out our website for any training seminars that might be valuable to you. We also provide, as part of our consulting services, really valuable market research. This can help you make really good decisions on locations, whether or not your product is viable, better understand industry trends. And so that is wrapped up as part of our one-on-one consulting. We do not just hand that out, a piece at a time. It's actually part of a consulting relationship, but it's really valuable. In addition, probably the most valuable way that we help people is through a one-on-one consulting. It's free. You can meet with any one of us on our team, and we've got a great group, and we're all very mission focused and here to help people. And we can help people write business plans, put together financial projections, to submit financing applications. I have people I get on the phone with and simply walk them through the step-by-step steps they need to take from an administrative standpoint to get a business started. Sometimes that requires me doing a little bit of Googling as far as like getting things set up legally for your business. We also offer marketing consulting, and then what I also tell people is, if I meet people or if we're out and about, I say, just set up a meeting for a consultation, and we will figure out what your needs are and how we can help. But those are some of the primary ways that we assist people. Okay, so today we're going to go through a few different things. I will talk about how you make a good decision about whether or not your idea is feasible. We'll also talk about writing a business plan, some other things that you need to consider. Then Cal from Wright, Lindsey, Jennings is going to address legal and tax issues. And Alicia Funa from Arvest Bank is going to address financing. So you should get a really well-rounded bit of information here. So that's our goal here today. Okay, so is your business idea feasible? So one of the things I tell people when they come into my office is, what I want you to be able to do if you do this is still pay for whatever it is you want to pay for. For me, I like to travel. I've got my other things that I want to spend money on. I want to see all my clients still be able to do that at the end of the day when they start these businesses. So we go through this process to make sure, yes, it's feasible and it's likely to make money before you launch into starting it, if it's a high capital risk or you're walking away from a job or something like that. Okay, so the first thing we really need to understand, are people going to buy it, right? Like, there's no sense in launching something if no one, like typewriters. I mean, I don't think anybody's coming up with a new typewriter company, right? I worked in the vitamin industry before this in a corporate job. And so I like to use an example from that job that's really a good strategy for a lot of these examples. So when you're looking at the market and you're trying to understand, is there a market for my product? You want to look at industry driving forces. So we all know right now in America, people have access to a lot more information about their health, how to prevent disease, how to resolve disease, what things they can do to create longevity, what kind of physicians they need to see. They have more awareness about the types of diseases and issues out there and ways to stay healthy and things that they can do to improve their bodies and the way they feel. Okay, these are all industry drivers, right? Well, those drive demand for products and services. So we see, at a Walmart store now, there's a bigger set or a bigger section for fitness wear. For example, we've got more gyms popping up. We've got these online personal trainers. And we've got vitamins. So for us, when I worked in this retail chain, we were looking at a way to capture more sales of our vitamins from our existing customers. We found out through research, and this is something we would help you with, that our customers were actually buying specialty vitamins, which I'll get into, at other specialty retailers like GNC. And we were just a regular old drugstore chain competing against like Walgreens or Walmart or Sam's Club or something else. But we found out, okay, there is an opportunity for us to capture some of these people that are buying these special vitamins elsewhere and get them in our store by launching a line of vitamins with those similar attributes. You also need to understand your market size and market share. So we can run research with our market research to say how many people bought vitamins in a certain geography. Okay, so say 500 people bought vitamins in the last 6 months and somewhere in Fayetteville, and there's 10 vitamin stores. Probably not a big market. You're probably not going to get a good chunk of the share given that the market is probably saturated. So those are some of the things that we look at. You can also have share targets. I worked with another retailer that I had a share target for a specific business and run through like what you know about your customers, and do you think based on sales you're projecting you can actually capture the share of the market that you need to capture for your own company goals. The next thing you need to think about is management. So I thought about starting my own consulting business when I left the corporate world before I started this job, and went through all this and thought, I would like somebody else to do that. I don't want to do any of that myself. So here I am helping you figure out how to do all this stuff. So which is perfect for me. While the eBay figures all this stuff out. So you're responsible for direct marketing and advertising. That means developing a great brand strategy, which we'll talk a little bit about, a marketing plan, a marketing budget, and then executing it. That is an enormous amount of work. That's not just popping on. You'll stress yourself out if you pop on social media every other day to do a post. You need to have a plan. You need to have language that's created for your business to build your brand. So that's really important. If you don't like to do this, you need to figure out, looking at your financials, whether or not you can pay somebody else to do this. That's really important. You're also going to be responsible for the finance piece of your business. So a lot of people don't like this. So this is not just your bookkeeping, okay? Like you obviously have to answer to Uncle Sam at the end of the year for sure. We don't want to make any mistakes there. But this is also about financial literacy and understanding the financial performance of your business. You need to be able to track your revenue and your profitability and say, okay, this product is selling more. If I'm at retail, do I allocate more shelf space to a particular product because it is selling more? Or, okay, my costs are really going up in this area. What is it? What phone call do I need to make? What do I need to change? All of that stuff. So it's not just bookkeeping, but it's also financial literacy and financial analysis. If that's not sounding fun to you, you need to hire someone that does think that's fun and plan financially to be able to do that. You're also going to have to look for ways to consistently improve operational efficiency. I think Cal is so sick of my kale salad because we've been doing this for like 5 years now. My kale salad example, that's the best thing I can think of. So I love to make these like unbelievable kale salads that cost a fortune. And there are 2 restaurants now in Fayetteville that do have some pretty good kale salads, but I haven't found anybody that can do it as well as I can. But they're very expensive, obviously. That's why nobody's doing it on that scale. Anyway, say some restaurant owner comes out and he's like, I am going to give Lori her kale salad. And he's got this great regional distributor for this kale that's awesome. And, they're selling like hotcakes, these kale salads. I'm coming in 3 times a week. We're so pumped about the kale salads. And then he looks at his P&L and he goes and talks to his chef, and they're having to throw away half of this kale shipment every week because it's coming from a regional distributor and it's going to waste. Okay. So then you gotta think, okay, maybe do I need to go to a local distributor, run the numbers? Does that mean, okay, net, even if I pay a little more for a local producer, I'm not gonna have the waste that I'm having with the regional producer, or can I charge a little bit more and market the fact that this is local kale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're gonna always be thinking of that extra stuff, not just managing it, not just the money, not just the marketing, but these little nitpick details about, making sure Lori Lieblong makes your kale salad and you can make money off that. The last piece is placing the right person in the right job. You need to have people that know what they're doing, make sure you help them understand what they need to be doing in the right job. On small teams, this is critically important. If this is an organization where it's going to be a team effort, you need to make sure that you hire people with that right attitude. And then most importantly, not all bosses are great. We've probably all worked for somebody that we didn't love, and we probably didn't stay that long at that place. So if you don't think managing people is going to be your greatest skill set, you need to get some training to improve upon that, or consider hiring a general manager or something like that to help you understand managing people, because it is a really, just let's all think back to that one boss we had at one point in our life, and I think that reveals itself. Okay, money. This is also really incredibly important. I mean, something can be really going to happen in the market. You think you can do it, you want to do it, you're excited, but it takes money to start a business. And sometimes it takes $2 million and sometimes it takes $5,000. It just depends on the business. Okay. You've got to first identify your startup costs. So what are all the first fixed expenses that you need in order to get a business up and going? And this is stuff from office supply to major equipment to land, building, basic fees to get up and running. We've got a great financial template that we work with on clients to do this. So if you come meet with me, we will do this very step by step, and it will not seem overwhelming, or you'll be explained exactly how to do it. Then you also need to figure out how much of your own money can you contribute. A lot of people think, well, I can get financing, or I can do there's grants out there, and sometimes there are, or whatever, but for the most part, you're going to have some money yourself. And so you need to determine what amount is that and where can I get it from. Like I said, we have a great financial tool that will allow us to work with you. All you do is give us data on the expenses you need to get started, what you expect from an expense standpoint on a monthly basis, and then we can work together on revenue projections to determine how much money you think you're going to make. And that's going to give us financial statements. That's going to tell us sales, profits, and cash flow. Because at the end of the day, probably most importantly, you have to cash flow. This has to have money in the bank at the end of the day. All these other numbers are great, but that bottom line number in terms of cash is what is important. And then you also want to identify funding sources. Are you going to look at banking? Are you going to try to search out grants? Are you going to find money from family? What else are you going to kind of look at? So if you've gone through all that process and you think, yeah, I think this is something I want to do, we recommend writing a business plan regardless of whether or not you're seeking funding. If you want to, great, I will help you. If you don't want to, if you want to go on your merry way, I will help you with the basic things you need to get started. This is not something I enforce on people, but it is a good idea to write a business plan because it does give you a roadmap for the business. And it is also required for bank finance. So we've got a really simple template. I'm sure if some of you have been online for business plans, you've seen all these really complicated multiple Roman numeral business plans that are really overwhelming. This is ours. It's super simple. Come see me. It's a lot easier. And I do this step by step with my clients. You'll have an executive summary, which you write last, which is a summary of the plan. You'll go through products and services where you talk about the products or services you're going to sell. You'll talk about your market. Remember, we talked about those people, the importance of having people to buy your product. You'll talk about the industry. You'll address operations and management. And then finally, the financial plan. So products and services. Okay, so you need to have a detailed explanation of what you plan to sell. Vitamins is too broad. We decided to launch specialty vitamins that were preservative-free, gluten-free, all-natural, organic, preservative-free, vegan, vegetarian. So really getting specific there. We're also selling them in a drugstore chain as well as online. And then we were pricing ourselves at a premium to our competition in terms of traditional retailers, and also at a premium to the other products that we had in our store. It's also important when you're giving this detailed explanation of products and services that you put this into layman's terms. One, if you're going for bank financing, just go ahead and assume your banker does not know anything about the business that you are starting, and don't expect them to Google and search and try to figure out what it is you're trying to sell. Put it really simply. And also, you need to learn how to talk about your products in a simple way so that when someone gets on your website and they need your services, they're not confused. I have not purchased a roof. If I got on a roofing company's website and they explained all the nitpick details about how roofs are constructed, I would run the other direction because I'd be like, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't even want to know about that. I just want the roof. So it's really important that you get really detailed and really clear, but also that that it is simple, both from a financing standpoint, and then also because you'll later want to make sure you have clear communication in your marketing. You're also going to want to address pricing. We were priced at a premium, like I said, to our competitors, both in the store and in retail, or we were priced at a premium. You can also be competitively priced. Like somebody that would have been competitively priced to us would have been a GNC. Somebody at a value would have been a Walmart. And somebody that at a premium might have been a really fancy online store selling like really super specialty vitamins. You also want to explain your pricing structure. You buy a bottle of vitamins in a bottle. You buy gas. Thanks for this. I used to use this really complicated example, and the Cal helped me out. Gasoline you buy in bulk. And so that's an example of bulk pricing. And then we also have unit pricing. So that's really important. So that's all going to roll into products and services. When I do this with clients, we go piece by piece, like one little piece of the business plan at a time, so that it's not overwhelming and we can really nail it down. The next piece is their market. So this is written at the bottom, but market research is going to help you dictate most of this, okay? So for the vitamins, we found out through research that people who ate foods that were vegan, vegetarian, natural, organic, preservative-free, wanted those same attributes in their vitamins. So our target market had that specific need, for example. They were also in the millennial age range, women exercising 4 or more times a week, taking at least 2 vitamins a day. These are people that really, really engaged in the category. And we needed to understand that so we could know, okay, how do we market? How do we speak? What kind of language do we use for these people? And make sure our product assortment was appropriate. As far as your brand strategy goes, our point of difference was we were the only option in that retailer for people who were buying their other stuff in that retailer to get their vitamins. So they didn't have to make a special trip to GNC. And if somebody was over at Walmart buying the same shampoo, well, they could go over to our retailer and get their specialty vitamins and their Pantene shampoo at the same time. So you'll talk about that, and I can elaborate on brand strategy in separate meetings because that's a really big component before you launch before you start your marketing, but that is kind of a separate seminar, separate meeting. You're also going to do a deep dive competitor analysis. Who are your top competitors? Where are they located? How long have they been in business? How are they pricing their products? What are they claiming sets them apart from other businesses? What are their customers saying about them on customer reviews? Everything you can think about to better understand your competitors is going to go into this section of the business plan. In addition, you're also going to talk about your marketing and sales strategy. So we had this brand of vitamins that had these specialty attributes, but we had to come up with like a marketing campaign. What were we going to tell people? And we decided to communicate what you put into your body matters. That's the ad campaign that we came up with for this particular one. And it had all the colors and all the stuff that we had done doing a lot of branding work. In addition, you're going to explain your location decision. So when you decide to open up your vitamin shop somewhere in Northwest Arkansas, you're going to want to substantiate your location by a high traffic count, lots of people rolling through. You're also going to want to say, okay, based on the research, and we can get this with our research, how many people are buying vitamins in that area? Is it a lot of people buying vitamins? And what are people spending on vitamins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to support your location decision. And all of this will be supported with market research. Like I said, I can go through this with you and it's a lot simpler in a step-by-step process. But if you've seen business plans online and you're seeing this, you're probably thinking, wow, this is a lot simpler than what I would counter through Google. Okay, the next session is industry. And this is an important part. I talked about the vitamins and the health industry and how people are becoming more aware of healthcare. Those are important things to know that are big high level industry things. But you also need to get specific into like the vitamin category. For example, what are we doing in terms of sales and marketing? Okay, expert endorsements, physician recommendations, and like fitness ambassadors or other health ambassadors, great ways to drive that business. At retail, we did a lot of like online couponing, email marketing. That works for that category. There's also a lot of magazine advertising. Those are the things that are effective in that category. What are the effective tactics for marketing your product in your specific product category? Then you also want to think about finance and regulation. Is cyclical cash flow a thing? Okay, if you have a water park that you're opening in Northwest Arkansas, we're not warm all year round. It's really hot right now, but was it this winter that we also had the really, really deep freeze? I can't keep up, but yeah. So when it's real cold outside, your water park isn't gonna be doing too well. And so you need to look at the finances and say, okay, can we make enough money in the summer to offset those months that were closed in the winter? Also regulation. So for the vitamin category, it's not regulated by the FDA, but it's heavily scrutinized by the FDA. And so you have to really watch what you are, you have to really watch what claims you're making on packaging in those product categories and other holistic type categories is true, because they're scrutinized. Business challenges. So I interviewed with Duracell, I don't know, like 8 years ago, maybe, for a corporate job. And I just remember great interview, great people. And I remember thinking, these are batteries. Everything has a charger. What's their game plan, right? Are they going to get into chargers? And I'm not following Duracell. I have no idea what they're doing. So they have probably figured it out, smart people. But that would be something for me at Duracell, wondering, we've got this like markets like the typewriter guys. You know, if we still have typewriter makers, they're hanging out, pushing towards the vintage people. Okay, industry opportunities. So we found out through our research that people wanted these specialty vitamins because they're eating these specialty foods. That was the trend and the niche that we were able to find. What are the industry trends and things going on in your industry that you can capture, that you need to watch, that you want to may want to partake in or differentiate yourself from? The next component is operations. So I like to call this people and processes. And this is probably not everyone's favorite part of a business plan to do with me. But you need to lay out who is going to be working in the business, their responsibilities, their background, and then you need to lay out the literal day-to-day operations of the business. How is this ship going to sail every day? This is important. You know, when you go in for bank financing, you need to do, and Alicia will talk to this, but you need to demonstrate that you know what you're doing. But I can tell you like how many people will find like, okay, and then I need this, and I need to do this, and we didn't think about that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When they go through this process of writing out the day-to-day operations, it reveals a lot of other things, but you need to have this mapped out before you just jump in, for the most part. Last, but probably most importantly, is the budget and financial plan. And this is what I like to get people started on in the beginning, especially if they have a capital need, is the financials. I mentioned our financial workbook that we work with. And you will just put in your startup expenses, inventory, equipment, anything like that that you need, and all of those other expenses. And then it will explain how are you going to perform. It's just the expenses, the startup costs, your revenue projections, and then we'll figure out, is this going to perform? That needs to be included in your business plan as well. Finally, you write your executive summary. So this is usually the first part people read, and sometimes they will not read past this if they don't like it. So it's critically important. It is a summary of the key components of the business plan. You're going to highlight your target market and all of this stuff section in the market section. You're going to highlight the key industry trends and challenges. You're going to describe your company. You're going to put together your financing proposal. It's the short version. It's the cliff notes of your business plan. Okay. So this is really important, that it's persuasive and easy to understand and quick to read. So now we'll get into some other things that you need to think about when starting your own business. If you're going to have a business, you do need to consider talking to an insurance agent. I tell people this in meetings. Talk to a small business insurance agency. agent, it's a good idea to start with whoever does your homeowners or your auto and see if they have a small business insurance agent. And they will help you, just like when you figure out your homeowner's policy or your auto policy or your boat policy or whatever it may be. They will help you determine the proper types of coverage that you need. Some common coverages are property and casualty for property damages, general liability, product liability if you sell a product, workers' compensation in case someone is injured, business interruption. This can help you if your business has to close for a period of time, potentially recover lost expenses or revenue, and then key person or life insurance. Say you've got a person in the business that's really critical and they pass away, and them not being part of the business would cost them the business money. You need life insurance on that individual. So personnel. So you need to know the employment laws. Nobody wants to get in trouble with like a human resources mess, right? Arkansas Department of Labor has great information about the labor laws. You need to understand the differences between an employee and an independent contractor. This is a question I get from clients a lot. So I'm an employee of the University of Arkansas. This laptop was given to me by the U of A. This whole, workshop room is part of the University of Arkansas. I get told when I'm supposed to be at work. I'm supposed to be working Monday through Friday, right? Period. Because I'm a full-time employee, and that's when our offices are owning. I have specific job responsibilities that I'm going to do, and I'm told how to do them in theory. And I have a lot of freedom with this. I've been doing this 7.5 years. For independent contractors, they have their own tools. Like, let's say I was an independent consultant working with the ASBTDC. I would come in with my own laptop. I would probably figure out when I'm going to work and work with the person I was contracting with. I would have my own way of doing things, may take some requests. But I would have a lot of independence from the organization. Also, employees are more difficult to separate from, whereas independent contractors are not. You pay benefits and taxes on employees, and you don't on contractor. They pay their own taxes and figure out their own benefits. You need to know the proper practices for interviewing, hiring, and firing. You don't want to say anything wrong in an interview process or fire somebody incorrectly and find yourself in trouble. And you want to make sure you hire the right people. You can also develop a personnel manual or employee handbook. This is really good if you've got a lot of workers, so that people really understand what their role is and the rules in the company. This also makes it easier if you need to take disciplinary action. You've got something in place that says, well, this is how you're supposed to behave, and you did this, and then there's a difference between the two, and so, okay, we need to take some action. Also consider employment or temp agencies for help in hiring. They can be really helpful in helping you find the right people for the right job if going out and hiring for yourself seems overwhelming. Home-based business. Zoning laws. You need to make sure that you can do business out of your home. In a lot of cases, this is fine for micro businesses, but you need to make sure, just in case, you don't want to be selling your vitamins in and out of your living room, and then your POA neighbor next door says, why is that UPS truck coming and going, and shut you down because it's not allowed through POA laws. There are also tax advantages of business use of home. You can write off some of your home expenses on taxes if you do business out of your home. You'll need to make sure you touch base with your homeowner's insurance to see what kind of policy you're going to need, or what's going to need to change still if you're doing business. You also want to consider some of these basic things like mail delivery. Do you want your customers to have your home address, or do you want to have a post office bucket? And then telephone. Do you want to have your cell phone as your phone for your customers, or do you want to have a separate phone? So these are just some of the things that you need to ask yourself with the home-based business. Okay, brand. There we go. Okay, brand and marketing strategy. So this is what I talked about with the vitamins. Our major difference was the fact that we were these specialty vitamins that could launch in that our clients who wanted specialty vitamins could buy at our regular retail store that sold Pantene shampoo and Dove soap. And then we built on a marketing strategy. This what you put into your body matters. We built a marketing plan and budget. So how much were we going to spend that year and what were we going to do? And then we execute it. These are really key important things that you need to do. If you don't invest in your business and marketing, you're most likely not going to be as successful as you want to be. A lot of people want to forgo a website at first, but let's remember what we all do when we want to look for something. We Google. And so it's a good idea to have a website. Social media platforms are also huge. You can do a lot to grow your business with social media, but you want to make sure that you're strategic about social media. It can get really overwhelming. So if you are a business to consumer product like vitamins, you might need to have a company owner, company place on LinkedIn, but most of your marketing may be going through those personal social media channels that that people are watching for information. And on the flip side, if you're an accountant, you're probably going to need a really big, robust LinkedIn presence. Also, do not discount the importance of networking. It is still important to get out and meet people face to face, regardless of what business you're in. It helps you grow your business. Also, I found in the entrepreneurial community, people get a lot of support doing that. Going to networking events with other small business owners, you get that peer-to-peer support that you're not really otherwise going to find. So it's really important. I sit on the committee for the Rogersville Chamber of Commerce and have for over 7 years now, and still go to some of the events and still find it valuable. That face-to-face time is really important. Oh, I touched this. Sorry. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Cal now, who's going to talk about the legal stuff and educate you on all this fun and exciting legal information that will be really valuable. And I'm thankful he is here because I did not want to be the one to try to explain it.
Yeah, if there's anybody needs to take a nap, now's probably the time, because the next 30 minutes we're going to be talking about legal tax issues. As Lori said, my name's Cal Rose. I guess do I need to be like more in the middle so we're seeing here?
You can be wherever feels comfortable.
Thank you. That's
whatever you want to do.
That makes me feel comfortable. I'm going to go through this. If y'all have questions, just shout them out at me. I know we'll save some time at the end for a Q&A session, but if we're on a topic, you have questions, just say something, we'll go through it. I always like to start with this slide. For all of you who haven't started a business before, it's the execution of this. We deal and work with a lot of startup clients in Northwest Arkansas. Everybody's got the next great idea. Every class of juniors and seniors at the university are going to be the next Google. They're going to have the next medical device product that's going to be, raise $100 million of capital and sell for 500 millions. They all have that idea. The execution, the follow-through is not always there. The fact that you guys are here today means that you're at least taking the right steps in the beginning to kind of get your ducks in a row and get lined up and be on the right path to execute your business. Just kind of by show of hands as we go into this, how many of you have formed an entity, formed a business, an LLC? A couple of you already have. The rest of you kind of still in the planning process and here to listen to people like me talk for 30 minutes. This will give you an idea of kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to spend most of our time really talking about entity structure. What is an LLC corporation? What are your options? What do they do? What are the advantages? All of that. We'll touch on these other issues pretty briefly. Mainly because they're too complicated in and of themselves for us to really just kind of to really dive into, but I want to hit on them because they are important issues on the legal tax side for any small business, any kind of new entrepreneur who's doing this for the first or second time to be aware of. So at least maybe when you see this in your business, you're like, oh, hey, I remember that one guy said something about this that one time, and this sounds somewhat familiar. Why should you care about anything that I'm going to talk to you about today? Main one, protection of your personal assets. It's really the main primary reason why people form LLCs, why they exist, why corporations exist. If you start a business, you don't want your house, your car, your personal assets to be at risk if you get sued, if you're unable to pay your bills, things like that. And so what an LLC or corporation will do is provide personal liability and asset protection, ease of administration. If you have, especially if you have partners, business partners in your business, having a well thought out agreement with your business partners on the front end will save you a lot of time, headache, and oftentimes money on the back end. Avoid litigation kind of plays into that. If my litigation partners were in the room, I may not say this, but the way I look at it is you can pay me X amount of dollars to do all of this correctly on the front end, so that if you do get in a dispute with your business partner, if something happens, they die, they leave and go to the Cayman Islands, there's a process already built into your documents for that. If there's not, you, your business partner, and your business could be tied up in litigation for years, and it is a lot more expensive to pay those people to fight it out in court than it is for all of us to figure it out on the front end. Well, we're all still friends, and we're all aligned on the mission and the expectation. Transferability of ownership, we'll talk about that. Again, you go into business with somebody, and then a year later, they're like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm going to move to California. Maybe I'm getting a divorce, and now my ex-wife or husband wants 50% of the ownership in this company. And maybe you, as the other business owner, don't want to be involved with a divorced couple as now your business partners. And so we usually try to address things like that. Again, try to give you a pretty clear roadmap in your documents of how those situations are handled. Managing cash flows, being aware of your tax consequences and your contract terms, how all of those things interplay will be very helpful. When Alicia comes up here and gives her presentation, it really helps. It's what banks look at a lot of times to determine if you're eligible for lines of credit, loans, and things like that. Protection of intellectual property. If any of you are starting a business kind of in the software space, you're building an app, you're doing something along those lines. If you have employees, or if you hire a development company to build that app, to work on that software for you, you want to make sure that your contract says you own the intellectual property to that. It doesn't always say. Sometimes they're licensing that intellectual property to you to let you use it. And then you go 2-3 years down the road, and now somebody wants to buy your company. Oh, but wait, they figured out you don't actually own it. All you have is the right to use it. And that creates issues down the line in terms of being able to sell, bringing in investors and things like that. All right. Probably what we'll spend the most time on today, what I talked about, is talking about structuring your business on the legal side of this. We'll put up here kind of the 4 basic structure types. The first 2 are really not structures. I really kind of consider those really the lack of structure. Those are the default if you don't form an LLC, if you don't form a corporation. LLCs and corporations only exist because our state legislature says they exist. We pass laws saying this is a limited liability company. This is an LLC. These are the requirements. This is how you form it. This is how distributions is done. Management decisions are made, right? But all of that is because we have specific laws that were passed creating LLCs. Same thing for corporations. Doesn't mean that you can't go into business with someone, or you can't engage in some sort of business venture, without forming an LLC or corporation. You can certainly do that, and the law has a way of addressing those situations as well. It's just that you're not going to like them. And if you take away any really issue or advice from my portion of this, it's that being a sole proprietorship or a general partnership is something you do not want to do and you want to avoid. Let's talk a little bit about sole proprietorship. So that's a little Timmy there. He's got a lemonade stand. He didn't speak to me, so he didn't form an LLC. He doesn't have any business owners, so he is what we consider a sole proprietorship. He is a person engaging in business activity for profit. That means he is a sole proprietorship in the eyes of the law. And what that means is that his business and him are not 2 separate things. They're all one. And so since there's not a separation of his business from himself, his assets are at risk. If he poisons the whole neighborhood with a bad batch of lemonade and everybody has to go to the hospital, they can sue him. They can go after his baseball card collection, his bike, everything else. His personal assets are at risk. The good part about sole proprietorship, if there is one, is that you don't have to talk to an attorney. You don't have to deal with documents. It just happens. It's very easy to create and administer because there are no rules. There just really aren't any benefits either. So that is, again, how the law handles a situation whenever you don't form an LLC or corporation. General partnership is the same concept, but it's two or more people engaging in a business activity for profit. Again, easy to set up, easy to create because it just happens. Timmy brings his neighborhood friends in. Now all four of them are splitting the profits of this lemonade empire evenly between the four of them. But again, there's no liability protection. And in this situation, it even kind of stacks and expands upon that risk, because not only are your assets at risk for things that you do in the context of this business venture, you can now be sued for things that your business partners do in the context of this business venture. So let's say, Timmy leaves and gets on his bike and runs a red light and causes a wreck because he was going to the grocery store to get more lemons. And now there's a massive lawsuit involved with his negligence in causing that wreck. Well, they can go after all these other kids, their business partners' assets as well. So you're not only liable for your actions, for your liabilities that were incurred in the course of running that business, but you're also liable and at risk for anything that your business partners do as well. So again, the takeaway from these is that you really want to avoid this situation, if at all possible, because it greatly expands the personal risk that's at stake. From there, and for the rest of this, what we'll talk about really is entities, legal entities that protect you from that liability. We'll start with corporations, C corporations. This is kind of the old classic tried and true form of entity. We'll talk about LLCs more in a second, which is probably what most people here are going to use. It's by far the most commonly used entity today. But LLCs didn't exist, at least in Arkansas, until 1993. That statute that we were talking about being created in Arkansas was first created in 1993. 2 years ago, we replaced our LLC statute with a new set of LLC statutes. But before 1993, really your main entity that most for-profit businesses used were corporations. So we have hundreds of years of case law of corporations. We have a lot of formalities and rules and just policies, best practices that apply to corporations. Corporations are going to be a little bit more formal, a little bit more rigid than LLCs. LLCs were kind of created to make it a little bit easier for people to form a company and not have to, for instance, appoint a board of directors and have a directors meeting every year. In a corporation, you kind of have three sets of actors. The owners are shareholders. Shareholders do not do anything in terms of managing the business or making decisions on behalf of the business. The only thing that shareholders do really is that once a year, they're supposed to get together and appoint the board of directors. The board of directors then appoints people to be the officers, the president, the secretary, the treasurer. If you want to use CEO, CTO, those kind of C-suite titles, you can do that. But everybody kind of has their own set of rules. It's kind of like the three branches of government. There's checks and balances on all of them. And it gets a little bit confusing for a lot of small businesses, especially where it's just you, right? It's just going to be me. But legally, even if you're the 100% owner, you have to have a board of directors meeting with yourself. You have to have a shareholders meeting with yourself. You can do it in front of the TV, watching a game with a beer in your hand or, whatever you want, a glass of wine. But legally, you have to have that meeting once a year and you have to go through these formalities. You form a corporation by filing articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State's office. That document requires you to list out the amount of shares you want to issue, the classes, if you have different classes, the par value. There's all kinds of requirements in your articles that the Secretary of State is going to require. Again, that in most situations for a solo business owner don't really matter. But if you don't do it correctly, the Secretary of State's not going to let you form the company. Usually the other document you have with a corporation are a set of bylaws. Bylaws are very boring and very administrative, and they say, this is when you hold your shareholders meeting. This is who's entitled to vote at the shareholders meeting. This is how we determine a quorum. This is, so it's very administrative, and most of it tracks our corporate statutes. But those are typically the two primary documents in a corporation, are articles of incorporation and bylaws. Corporations provide separate liability. So if you're a shareholder, you're an officer, you're a director, you are not, under most circumstances, liable for the debts or liabilities of that corporation. If the corporation gets sued, someone is suing the corporation. They're not suing you, so only the assets of the corporation are at stake. There are exceptions to that, and we'll talk about some of those. One, which is very common in the bank context, is if you take out a loan for your company, almost all banks are going to require you as the owner to sign a personal guarantee. So it's not that you're necessarily changing what the law is. It's just that you're signing a contract that says, if the company is unable to pay this debt, I will personally be on the hook to pay this debt. So again, not really an exception, but a very common way in which this can change. C corporations, on a tax perspective, most small businesses are not C corporations. Most businesses that have maybe 20, 30, 40 plus shareholders that have a lot of just formalities that are inherent in them do benefit from being C corporations. All of your publicly traded corporations are C corporations. What you will often hear if you talk to a CPA or accountant about a C corp is this term called double taxation. That, from a tax perspective, traditionally C corps have not been a very tax efficient vehicle for small businesses. And what that double taxation is talking about is, if you're let's just take a very easy scenario, you're the 100% shareholder, officer, director, you're running the business. At the end of the year, the business has $100,000 of profits sitting in the bank account, and you want to distribute those to you. One way you could do it is just pay it out to yourself as salary or as a bonus. In that situation, it's just W-2 income, and it's just taxed as though you earned it as an employee. But if you were to distribute that out to yourself, the first thing that happens is the corporation itself gets taxed on your profits. $100,000 of profit. Currently, that tax rate's 21%. Not that difficult, 21%. So then now we've got about 79,000 left over. You make that distribution. You, as the shareholder, then pay a tax on that distribution at capital gains rates currently. Most likely 15%, could be 20. When you kind of combine those, you're looking at about a combined 35% effective tax rate, which is not really that much different than what you would pay in an S corp or a partnership LLC, which we'll talk about in a second. So that double taxation traditionally used to be a much bigger deal, because instead of a 21% tax rate, that corporate tax rate has been 35%. So you're talking about paying 35, then 15. So then now you're talking about 50% tax on every dollar of profit to get it out of the corporation and into your hands. The tax cuts that happened in 2017 reduced the corporate rate to 21. If nothing happens at the end of 2025, heading into the year 2026, that corporate rate is set to go back up. And so, the double taxation, again, if you talk to a CPA, everybody will say, hey, never be a C corp. Right now, not that big of a difference, but certainly could be if that changes in the future. S corporations, same thing legally. What we're going to have to try to do is distinguish between legal aspects of these businesses in terms of what are the formalities around meetings and what does the law require you to do on the administrative side versus the tax side. So an S corp on the legal side is the same thing as a C corp. There are a few differences or a few additional differences that we'll talk about. Mainly what an S corporation is a tax divergence from a C corp. It does not have that double taxation situation that we talked about. And so an S corp and a partnership, which is really more of what an LLC is typically, we'll talk about that in a second. They're what we call pass-through entities or flow-through entities. So if we take that same example from earlier, at the end of the year, you have $100,000 of profit in your company. The corporation itself doesn't pay taxes. It is not a taxpayer. The corporation is required to essentially do an informational return. It is still required to put all of the information together as though it was going to file a tax return. But what it does is it says, okay, we did all of this. We determined that we had $100,000 of profits. You're the 100% owner of the business. So that $100,000 now flows through, passes through to your personal income tax return. And that's if you distributed that money or not. So even if you kept that money in the bank account, the only thing that matters is what your profits were. You pay taxes on that. Now you could take money out to pay those taxes. And the good thing is in that scenario, if you get taxed on 100,000 and let's say you gave yourself 50 of that to pay the taxes and maybe have a little bit more, you've kind of set up a reserve. At some point in the future, if you wanted to take $50,000 out of the business, you don't pay taxes on it at that time because you've prepaid the taxes on that money. But the taxes aren't triggered by when the timing of it is not when you distribute it, it's when you earned it. So all of that goes through on your personal income tax return. Whatever your personal income tax bracket is the tax rate you pay on that income, with one key difference. And this is true with partnerships and S corps to some extent. We'll talk about this in a second. If you work for your business and it's a pass-through entity like this, you compare this to a scenario where let's say you work for Walmart and you're a W-2 employee. If you just work for someone else, when you get your paycheck, there's the income tax that they withhold, but then there's FICA, Social Security, there's all the payroll taxes that are that come out of your paycheck as well. When you're a W-2 employee, you pay half of that tax, your employer pays half of that tax. Your employer's portion doesn't show up on your pay stub. That's just something they pay. You don't ever know about it unless they tell you about it. But it ends up being about 14 to 15% additional payroll taxes. And that's in addition to whatever your actual income tax bracket is. When you are self-employed, which in this context, if you're an owner of an S corp or a partnership and you work for the business, you are considered the employee and the employer for purposes of those payroll taxes. So you are, in addition to paying your 22%, whatever income tax bracket you're in, you have an additional 15% of payroll taxes for Social Security, Medicare, FICA, all of that stuff. The only good thing is like eventually when you get 57 and a half or whatever the age is, whenever you finally get to draw on your Social Security, you've paid in, so you get that money out. So you do get the benefits of it, but it's a big surprise for a lot of small business owners the first time they've done it because they're thinking, well, my income tax bracket's 25%, so I'm going to kind of set that amount aside until it's time to pay taxes. Then they file their return and it comes back and they're really paying closer to 40% because of these payroll taxes. S corps, we'll talk why in a second. I'm not there yet, but almost every CPA that you go and talk to will tell you you should be an S corp. You avoid some self-employment taxes. You can minimize that self-employment tax burden. And for a lot of small businesses, that is the right analysis, the right advice. That's correct, but it is not always. And it is not always because of a few restrictions that S corps have. I deal with this in my practice all the time. People don't like going to attorneys. I get it. I don't like talking to attorneys most of the time. And so in the beginning stages, most people form their business. They do what their CPA tells them to. They do what they read online. And then once they're making money, once they've run into issues, then they get an attorney involved to kind of take a look at it. S corporations, all owners of S corporations have to be human individuals. Another company cannot have ownership in an S corp. Another thing is that you can't have multiple classes of stock. And that just means that if I own 10% of the business and you own 90 and we're going to do a distribution, I get 10%, you get 90. All distributions, all rights to cash have to match ownership. And that's not always the case, especially when you start thinking about investors. When an investor comes into your business, a lot of times, especially if you're talking to people who do this for a living, VC firms, private equity firms, those type of people, they're going to say, hey, I'll give you $100,000 for 10%, but I want my $100,000 paid back first. Once you pay me my $100,000 back first, then all future distributions will be 90-10. Or they may say, even though I only own 10%, I get to appoint one person to the board. I get extra voting rights that other people don't have. Can't do that in an S corp. The no entity shareholder, basically the fact that all shareholders have to be individuals, is another problem for investors. Most people who invest through some sort of LLC, a fund, some other type of entity, so that it's not just in their individual name. It allows people to pool their money together to do an investment. You can't really do that in an S corp. So S corps will save you taxes for most small businesses. But if you're the type of small business that thinks that, well, I'm going to build this up in a year, I'm going to bring on investors, and then 3 years from now, I'm going to sell it for, of X multiple, whatever. If that's your kind of trajectory or path, being an S corp is probably not the best vehicle for you. And most CPAs don't tell you, because that's not part of their, what you're hiring them to do. You're hiring a CPA to minimize your tax burden. We'll talk about this in a second. I'll hold it. We'll move on. Yeah.
Question. If you want to, let's say you started a business and your plan wasn't to sell 3 years later, but then you're growing and you want to sell, but you're an S corp, can you get that changed to a better legal structure so that you can easily sell it?
That was the question I was about to answer, and then I moved on. So I'm going to get to it. It flows better once you have a little bit of background on LLCs. But I'll answer that question in a second. All right, LLCs. I told you this already. This background, to me at least, is helpful. LLCs in Arkansas didn't exist till 1993. Our tax code that we are currently using that applies to all of these entities we're talking about was enacted in 1986, 7 years before LLCs existed. For that reason, our tax code doesn't talk about LLCs. LLCs aren't a thing in our tax code. You are not taxed as a limited liability company. It doesn't even mention LLCs in the original text of our code. We now have some regulations and things that have been added. But keep in mind that an LLC is a legal vehicle. It is not a tax structure. It's not a tax vehicle. So at some point, your lawyer, your CPA, your accountant, or somebody will say, how are you taxed? And you'll say, well, I'm an LLC. And they'll say, well, no, but how are you taxed? And you say, well, I'm an LLC. You're not taxed as an LLC. You're taxed as either a partnership, an S corp, or a C corp. For the longest time, the IRS they had all these rules about which, depending on how you structured your LLC, which one of those baskets you fell in. Now, the IRS just lets you choose. You file a form. Again, the IRS has default rules, but if you want to change it, you can. And you send in a form and you say, I now want to be an S corp for tax purposes. And the IRS says, okay, great. You're now an S corp for tax purposes. To answer your question, if you do that, if you make an election to be taxed as a different type of entity than what you've previously been taxed as, you're stuck with it for 5 years. So you cannot change it for 5 years. If you form an LLC and you make that S election right away, you have basically what you have is 2.5 months to file that form, and they consider that to be retroactive to day one. That 5-year rule does not apply. So it's only if you were taxed as something, you changed it to something different afterwards. At that point in time, you're stuck with it for 5 years. That's kind of the tax side. So again, LLCs offer a lot of flexibility on the tax side because they allow you to kind of pick and choose depending on what you're doing, what your situation is, what makes most sense to you. But again, if you do change that structure, you're stuck with it. LLCs just across the board are generally just more flexible. They're easier to set up, easier to create. There's almost no formalities whatsoever. You can have meetings, you don't have to. You can have a board, you don't have to. You can have a president, you don't have to. You can have a managing member, you don't have to. So there's not as much formality. It's easier, a little bit cheaper to form. We charge about half the cost of form an LLC that we do for a corporation. Because when we form a corporation, there are 8 documents that we prepare. When we form an LLC, there are 2. Owners, from a nomenclature kind of standpoint, owners are called members. Makes you feel like you're in a club. It's real nice. And you have 2 different kind of management structures. Really, this only matters in a situation where you have multiple owners, but you have what's called member managed. And what member managed structure says is that if you are a member, if you're an owner, regardless of whether or not you own 1%, 10%, or 100%, you have the legal authority to walk into a bank and take out a loan. Now, most banks aren't going to allow you to do that without some due diligence, without getting everybody else on board. But legally, you can sign contracts. You can take on obligations of the company. So that's member managed. Basically, anyone who's a member is considered part of management and has the authority to do that. Not a great structure in scenarios where, you're the 100% owner and you have some employees that you want to give a few percentage points to as a reward or incentive to keep working for the business, because you probably don't want those people just on their own signing contracts or taking on obligations to the company. We compare that with manager managed, which is kind of more traditionally what you would think of, where the members vote, similar to a corporation. We appoint this person as the manager. They're the ones in charge of the day-to-day. They are the ones who have the legal authority. And you can basically just elect that in your documents. It's not a formal, you don't tell the IRS or member manage, manager manage. It's just the way that you set it up. Again, we talked about with LLCs, a lot of flexibility in how they can be taxed. And those same ownership restrictions that would apply to an S Corp don't apply to an LLC. With the caveat that if you are an LLC that is elected to be an S corporation for tax purposes, those ownership restrictions do apply. So you still can only have one class of ownership. You still can only have individual humans as owners. So those restrictions apply to the tax structure, not necessarily to the legal. Limited liability, we've talked about this. I'll just kind of hit on this because it's always good to point out that, limited liability is not absolute. There are still exceptions to this. There are still ways in which you as an owner can incur personal liability, fraud, intentional misconduct, criminal misconduct, gross negligence. If you engage in transactions with yourself, what we call self-dealing. Let's say me and Lori have an LLC, we're 50-50 partners. She's more passive, I'm more active, and I hire myself to provide legal services to our LLC, and I charge our LLC twice the rate what I normally charge my clients. And Lori's not paying attention, so for years this goes on. Lori can sue me. Okay, there are ways, self-dealing, conflict transactions, if they are not fair, if they're either not approved by the other owners or if they're not fair in the eyes of a court, I can be held personally liable for that. The final one is something called piercing the corporate veil. It's one of those things that sounds really cool. It is not. And basically what the courts have said is that we've given you this benefit of limited liability. It's in statute. We've said, hey, we've created these statutes. We've given this gift to you, but it's not absolute. It's not without a little bit of work on your end. So if you don't comply with what our laws say you have to comply with to be an LLC, you're not going to get the benefits. Where we see this most often is commingling assets. That's the biggest one, especially for small businesses, because it's an added unnecessary step practically, but it has legal significance. And so what courts have said is that if you're not treating your business as a separate entity from yourself, we're not going to do that. So if the business bank account is paying for your trip to Vegas, if they're paying off your mortgage, if they're paying your personal expenses, then you're commingling assets and funds. You're not treating the entity separate from yourself. In those situations, even though it's stupid, what you do is you have a bank account in the name of the company. you need 10 grand to go pay this bill or whatever, you just need that distribution, you transfer it over to your personal account. And then you spend it however you want. But you do need to have that step. One, it's just good for accounting practices, and to have a ledger of those distributions. But two, if you don't do that, a court could come in and say, well, look, I mean, this was really just your personal kind of slush fund that you were doing whatever you wanted with. So we're going to pierce the corporate veil. We're going to pierce the liability and not give you the benefits. This is really just for your slides. So you have some, how you form these various entities, some of the requirements, terms of art, things like that. From there, what we'll talk about for a few seconds is what should you be thinking about? What should you be considering before you form the entity, or before you really take substantive steps to move forward with business activity? Name availability is a huge one. There's two kind of hurdles in this context. One is what the Secretary of State will allow you to use. There are all kinds of LLCs, corporations that currently exist. I can't form an LLC or a corporation that uses the same name as one that's already on file in Arkansas. So, first you have to get it through the Secretary of State's process to allow you to use it. But even if they do, what you have to worry about then is trademark infringement. Is someone else using this name in the same industry as you in other places? Right, I could probably go to the Secretary of State right now and form an LLC and call it McDonald's Hamburger Company, LLC. And as long as nobody has an entity named exactly McDonald's Hamburger Company, Secretary of State's going to say, yeah, it's fine. Pay us our $50. We'll give you an LLC. Go on with your business. As soon as I open my restaurant and I call it McDonald's Hamburger Company, I'm going to get a cease and desist letter from McDonald's, even though the Secretary of State told me I could do it. So you really need to make sure you do an adequate search and your due diligence on whatever name you're going to use, especially because the problem with that scenario, obviously the McDonald's hamburger one is an obvious one. But what tends to happen is you use a name that somebody in North Carolina is using in the same type of industry. And you've never heard of them, you don't know about them, and they've never heard of you. And for the first year or two, while you're just a one-man shop in Bentonville, they've still never heard of you. And then you start getting some success. Then you open your second location, third, and then you start really, expanding. As soon as your business takes off and you become successful and you're building that brand awareness, that's whenever you show up on their radar. That's when you get hit with a cease and desist. So doing a trademark search, seeing what is out there on Google, every name in the world is trademarked. To actually violate a trademark, the standard is, are consumers confused by this? Right. So I could create McDonald's furniture store, and that would be fine, because a court would say, look, a consumer isn't going to wander into McDonald's furniture store thinking that they're going to a fast food restaurant. Right. So the way that it's actually utilized is important. Determining your tax status and talking to a CPA. I always say that a good CPA will save you more money than they cost. Developing that relationship early is important. And an attorney as well. I'll admit I'm biased, but I think you should go and talk to an attorney before you set up your business, especially if you have business partners. Like if you're by yourself, you want to get on LegalZoom, they'll spit you out documents that have the requirements needed that are in there. And at the end of the day, the only person who can really sue you for not following your internal policies, your operating agreement, your bylaws is yourself in that situation. And I'm pretty confident you're not going to do that. If you have a business partner involved, especially if they're friends or family, the way that you maintain them as friends and family is to just have really clear processes laid out in the beginning. Key questions for founders. We'll go through these pretty quickly. Hey, if I go into a business with somebody 50-50 and then they leave, they take another job, they could do something else, what happens to their shares? What happens to their ownership? Most people think that those people just have to give them up. Well, that's not true unless your documents say that. We see this a lot with these groups of students that come out of the university through a master's program or some sort of entrepreneurship program there. There's 4 of them, and they have this idea, and this is what they're all going to do for the next 2 years. And then 6 months later, one of them goes to grad school, and then 3 months after that, one of them gets a job offer in San Francisco, and then 6 months after that, one of them gets married and doesn't want to do this anymore. And now you have one guy who's the only one really working for the business, and he only has 25% ownership in the business because the other 3 people still own their shares. We typically, in that scenario, if they come to us on the front end, we will build in provisions of their documents that say, if you quit, leave, get fired, or are no longer actively engaged in the business, you either have to forfeit your ownership, maybe you have to sell it back, maybe your business partners get the opportunity to actually pay for it and buy it so that it's not just completely out the door for the work you've done getting to that point. A lot of different ways to handle it as long as it's handled, because otherwise you're going to be stuck with potentially a majority of the ownership no longer being involved in the business. How are day-to-day decisions made? Again, there's one owner in the business, pretty easy to determine how day-to-day decisions are made. If there are multiple owners, you have business partners, somebody might own 60%, you might own 40%, and if that's the case, they get to make almost all of the decisions. We can build in provisions that say, hey, we're not allowed to bring in new owners, sell the company, take out loans unless we all unanimously agree. So you can definitely tweak that and modify that to fit whatever your needs are there. How can somebody be removed? What if we want to sell the business? And what we see a lot of is a 50-50 business that, either didn't go to an attorney or didn't go to a good one. 50-50 business situations are really difficult if you ever get sideways with your business owner. The law does not provide a good dispute mechanism in that situation. The law, literally the law's approach to the situation is like what King Solomon did with the baby. They say, we are going to dissolve this. We're going to separate the assets, and you get half of the assets and you get half of the assets. And most of the time, a business that is 2 halves of a business are not nearly as valuable as a whole. And so again, in that situation, what we try to do is help our clients put in place a dispute mechanism to figure out how to resolve that situation. Regulatory and licensing, again, this is mainly just to have in your slides. Lori and her team have some really good resources online. Probably it says 2014, which probably shows that I probably need to update that link, but we'll make sure that's correct.
This is the stuff I mentioned that if you guys want to set up a meeting, I will go through and help you Google and figure out exactly what permits and things that you need to get started. If that's the only thing you need, still set up a meeting because can make some people want to pull their hair out.
Yeah, it's dealing with state agencies on all of these things is not fun. Most of the time they're helpful, but not always. One thing to always keep in mind is if you're running a business out of your home, especially if you have a POA or if you're in an apartment complex or you're renting or something like that, a lot of times you're not really allowed to run a business out of your home. So you need to check in on that, make sure if you're doing it in a way that is obscure, but check into those things. Taxes. These are all the taxes you're going to get to pay. Sales and use taxes, self-employment taxes. We talked about that. Social Security, withholding taxes on your employees' wages, unemployment taxes, franchise taxes to the Secretary of State. If you form an LLC or corporation, you got to pay them $150 every year for the benefit of existing. There's state income taxes. If you're in alcohol, restaurant business, you've got alcohol taxes. So there's a lot of those. And you don't want to run afoul either at the state or the federal level. The IRS is not necessarily the nicest organization to deal with. Again, why it's really important to talk to a CPA, a tax attorney like myself. IRS has a pretty good guide on its website. They at least try to provide you with some good information on how to navigate all of these issues. State of Arkansas, through the Department of Finance and Administration, also has some resources online that you can access. Real quickly, I'm going to roll through these pretty quick. We talked about some of these. These are just some probably general commercial contract issues that I see most often with small businesses. Lease agreements are probably the thing that I see more than any other that either penalize businesses for not reading them. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say screw them over, but penalize businesses for not reading them or lead to litigation. Payment terms in your contracts is very important. You know, if you're buying a product and your payment terms are 30 days and you're selling it to a client and that client's payment terms are 60 days, well, you're now floating 30 days of cost of goods sold. So matching up your payment terms and staying on top of how those things interact is really important. Ownership of intellectual property, we talked about that earlier. If you have employees who are developing, you know, software, apps, anything that you would consider intellectual property, you would want an agreement with them that basically says anything that they create for the business while we're paying you is owned by the business and not by them individually. Master agreements, SOWs, exhibits. If you're in vendor world, that can get very complicated. I mean, I have clients who come to me and say, hey, we have this issue with this contract, can you help me? And we have 9 different contracts with an MSA that was amended, and then there was an SOW, then there was a second one and a third one, and then the second one was amended, but maybe the third one was, but the fourth one wasn't. That can get really complicated, but it's really important to stay on track of those. Non-solicitation agreements, just be careful if those are in agreements that you sign, but also with your clients, especially if you, if you are providing access to your kind of resources to, things that are important to you. I think about this a lot. There's a whole industry of people who help you get your product into one. They have non-solicitation agreements where they can't hire your employees, you can't hire theirs. They also, there's a lot of terms like that are built in. So just be careful with those. And then termination and liability upon termination. You know, did you sign a 5-year contract that can't be terminated? Did you sign a 1-year contract that you can't terminate, but the other side can whenever they want? Things like that are just important. And those are the types of issues just with small business contracts that we typically run into. I'll stop there. There's my info if you need it. If there are Q&As, looks like we may have some online. We'll stick around after this and obviously answer those. But Alicia, I will turn it over to you.
Right. Hi, my name is Alicia Funa, and I'm a commercial banker at Arvest. So I've been with Arvest about almost 5 years, approaching 5 years. And I kind of like Lori most of my career was spent working for a large corporation, but I love helping small businesses and this is my passion. So I think Lori and I definitely have that in common. And so we're both really excited to be here to help you. Arvest works in conjunction with the ASBTDC. And so we're very familiar with the formats the projections go in and how their cash flows work. And so that just makes it easier for us and faster for us for you to get through the loan process. So sources of financing, and so of course, bank financing. So that's with or without an SBA guarantee. So an SBA, a Small Business Administration, is not a direct loan. So it is an enhancement that the bank uses to be able to lend to people that wouldn't normally qualify for a bank-only loan, or they're not able to pledge as much collateral, not able to put as much cash in. And so it's a credit enhancement versus a direct loan. Of course, your savings, and that goes along with the bank financing. So there are very, very, very few situations where we would offer 100% financing. So if you have an existing business and you're looking to expand that, there is a little small niche with the SBA program that may allow you to expand your business without any additional cash in. but very, very few situations where we're financing 100%. Gifts or loans from family is very common, as well as leasing companies are always an option. And then the last two, it's not my arena. I think it's words that you hear a lot in the financing arena, or that Lori may get asked, but definitely not my specialty, but we kind of wanted to put that on there as far as things that you might hear. It's very rare. So most of it's going to be either your savings, gifts from family or friends, or bank financing. So just general comments about obtaining financing. Before you sign any contractual agreements, such as a lease on a building or anything like that, make sure that you obtain the bank commitment. So if you're working with a bank on an SBA enhancement loan, make sure that you get, full approval before you're signing a lease and on the hook for anything else. And don't assume that you can get a bank or an SBA loan. And so just like a regular bank loan, your credit score does matter. So we'll take into account credit score, we'll take into account the cash flow of the project, we'll take into account your business plan that you work with Lori, and everything down to the location, right? Does it make sense? So there is some subjectivity into that, especially as we get into the larger loan amounts. And so a lot of people, their questions are, what do I do first? And it's really kind of doing everything simultaneously, because you want to start that relationship with your banker, your attorney, your CPA, the ASBTDC, really in conjunction with each other. So there may be a point where I say, okay, I can't go any further until we have X, but it's good to just kind of start all of that simultaneously so everybody's in communication. Don't expect to get a grant. I think Lori mentioned there are very, very few grants out there, and don't expect 100% financing. So I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about SBA loans, because for most startups, this is the program that you would fit into, unless you just have a very large savings account, you're putting a lot into it, pledging a lot of collateral. A lot of the startup businesses and even small business expansions fall under an SBA guarantee loan. Really, the bank will determine which program that you fit into or your request fits into, but I wanted to go ahead and kind of talk through some of the terminology that you'll hear, just so you know like what each program offers. So a 7A loan is eligible for most borrowers and most business purposes, including startup, acquiring, and expanding small businesses. And so, so if you working with a business broker, such and such business is for sale. So this would be a very common loan program that you might buy an existing business with. It allows for, it's really good for businesses that lease a space and don't own their own real estate, because we can mitigate that need for collateral with an SBA 7A loan. The SBA Express is really just a subset of the 7A, but it is lower loan amount. So it's capped, I think, about $500,000, and it is less paperwork. So I always tell everybody that in the process of an SBA loan, you will at one point hate me. And it's just a tremendous amount of paperwork. But as long as you stay on top of it, we all stay in communication, it really can be done. I'm closing on one on Friday, and that actually we worked with the ASBTDC with, and it's a great success story. And then the 504 loan program, usually real estate based, and so they can't take into account, blue sky or intangibles. And so it's really good for maybe you're an existing business and now you want to purchase real estate. And so that is a good program to expand your business with. So developing your financing request for initial capital. So again, you'll just work in conjunction with all your partners. And so you'll create that business plan, with Lori, and detail all the startup costs, really from beginning to end. So there's no such thing as too much information, but you also want to make it easy to, you definitely want to have the good summaries, because you want to make it kind of easy to find what is what, and not, make it too complicated. Create projections. And so you'll work with them in creating projections for gross sales, operating expenses, and really what that cash need is for that cash need every month. And so we do look for businesses to, like she said, cash flow. Ideally, the business is going to produce cash in excess of 20% of their debt service. And so that's a really kind of key target that we look for when we're analyzing business plans. So working capital is the bridge between your receivables and payables. And so if you're a store purchasing inventory, you're going to need money to purchase that inventory, but you're not going to get paid on it right away. So working capital lines of credit, which we can do through the SBA program, are really important. So if you're looking at, putting a certain amount down to get into a loan, you do not want to completely wipe out all of your liquidity. So you definitely want to have some funds for a rainy day. And even if you do have a working capital line of credit, you want to have some cash there so that you're not constantly paying interest on that and that the line of credit revolves. You had summarize your time in the industry and resume. So that does matter. And it is a requirement of SBA loans. And then cash contributions. And so the rules are constantly changing with the SBA, but there are stipulations over where you get that cash. So don't expect to get a consumer HELOC on your house last month and then try to use that cash for an SBA this month. There are some, if enough time elapses and it, can't truly be traced through, you can use that money for consumer purchases, which frees up your cash for your commercial, but don't assume that you can just get a loan for your cash injection and then put that right into an SBA loan the next month. Actually. So the SBA, so kind of what they do and don't, they do help small business owners obtain financing from a local bank. So you will always work in conjunction with a bank. There is a $5 million cap. It doesn't mean that the project or the business purpose can't exceed that, but the loan amount cannot exceed $5 million. And bank approval is still required. And so the bank is taking part of the risk and the SBA is taking part of the risk in these situations. And so the bank is going to have to be, okay, just because you meet the minimum criteria for SBA doesn't necessarily guarantee a bank approval, because the bank is taking on a portion of the risk, whether that's anywhere from 15%, all the way up to 50%. Other personal assets will likely to be required with an SBA loan. And so the most common requirements are, if you own your own home, they are going to require, in most instances, especially as we get to those upper amounts, a second mortgage on your primary residence. If you already have a second mortgage on your primary residence, then it might be a third mortgage on your primary residence. And so, and even if you kind of fall into that section where the SBA doesn't require that, the bank can actually require that as well. And so that, that just kind of gives that reassurance that you as a business owner are all in. Assignment of life insurance is very common. Back to that key business owner scenario that Lori was talking about, because if something happens to you, the business may not keep running and the source of repayment on the loan may be in jeopardy. And so assignment of life insurance is required most of the time on SBA loans. Again, there are some, examples with smaller loans that they may not require it, but the bank can require it if they feel more comfortable with it. So SBA enhanced loans versus traditional. So they can, they usually do have additional fees and higher rates, but it's not always the case. So with the 504 loan program, you're actually able to lock in, and this is typically real estate based, but to lock in at a long-term fixed rate that's usually lower than what the bank's offering for up to 25 years. So it could be, it's anywhere, I would say, from market rate to just maybe a hair higher. They do have a cap on the interest rate that you can be charged. And so you're not going to get some, real crazy amount, because the SBA doesn't want banks to take advantage of anybody, so they do cap the interest rate, but you may see a little bit higher just based on risk. They do look at credit histories and scores, just like the bank does. 10% cash equity is usually required, and then the bank can require over that. So if you're purchasing a business and we're looking at an SBA 7A loan, the typical structure is you will need to come up with 10% cash into that. So again, they don't make direct loans. They don't offer grant money. It's not a low interest loan, but it's also not a crazy high percentage either. And they don't allow balloon notes, which really just means that the rate is going to be adjustable during your term. It's not actually going to mature and go through a renewal process. It's going to adjust within the term. Record keeping. So it's really important, whether you're just starting up or whether you're existing and expanding, to keep good records. And so I would always recommend getting some sort of accounting software or outsourcing to somebody that can keep good financials. Because even when you get down to selling a business, a lot of these businesses that might have been around for 20, 30, 40 years, they've been very successful, but they haven't kept good records because they started way back when and just never had to. Maybe they didn't ever need a loan. And so it makes it really hard when it comes time to sell your business if you don't keep good records. Consult an accountant and setting up a bookkeeping system. And then there are third parties that can help with that as well. For bank accounts, so even if you are a sole prop, which we heard we do not recommend, but even if you are a sole proprietor, don't mix your personal with that. You can set up a separate account that is your business name, so-and-so John Doe, DBA, but you always want to keep your business assets and your business expenses separate from your personal. Get to know your bank loan officer before you need money. So it's never too early to establish a relationship. It's what we're here for. So even if you think, oh, I'm too early in the process to talk to a loan officer, I don't need that yet. It's never too early, because the more we get to know you, the easier and faster the process is going to be, and the more we're going to understand your business. And if you are an existing business and you borrow money, the bank's going to be checking in with you, and that's common. It doesn't mean anything's wrong, but just keep the bank informed about your business. So I like to look at it as we're all one team working together to help you. And so lastly, it's not really a 1, 2, 3, but it's just working all these things simultaneously. Every business is different. Every owner is different. There's no two situations are the same. And so a lot of times people will come and say, well, what is the minimum credit score I need? What exactly do my financials need to look like? And what amount can I borrow from that? But it is a little grayer in the commercial world because everybody's different. Every situation is different. And so it's just a continuous process that we just all have to keep each other updated on. But these are some of the final startup to-dos. And I think
I'll address this. So Julie mentioned this in the beginning. If you're finished with all yours. Thank you. So Julie mentioned this in the beginning, you'll get a survey. If you could respond to that survey and let us know what you'd like to learn, that's really helpful for us, so we can make sure that these are a valuable use of your time. So I am going to go over, we've got one other slide. Oh, I think we're done. Okay, sorry. Okay, let me go through and we'll look up some of these questions. Okay, I'm just going to go right from the beginning. I did not see this, Angela. Which slide did you want to see?
Lori, Angela had to leave for another meeting.
Okay.
But I let her know that I would make sure that she got the information.
Okay, great. And then we've got, to start a business in Arkansas, can the company register in other state but start a business in Arkansas? You register and, Cal might need to help me. What you do if you're registered legally set up in another state is you register as a foreign entity in the state of Arkansas is usually what is the case. So, that's how you would do it.
I have a question kind of, in conjunction with that. So is there an advantage that I'm not aware of to forming a business in Arkansas as opposed to forming it in another state and operating as a foreign entity? Is there any really?
Do you have anything to add to this?
There's really not. So you hear a lot about how you form a Delaware LLC or, Wyoming and like Utah are talked about a lot. Anything that you read online that says if you form a Wyoming LLC, you don't have to pay income taxes because Wyoming doesn't have an income tax, it's a scam. So you pay income taxes where the activity happens. Doesn't matter if your LLC is Arkansas, Delaware, whatever. If you go to work in Arkansas and you work in Texas, you have to kind of figure out how much income tax you pay in each different state. So there's no help. You see a lot of that online, like form a Wyoming LLC and you're exempt from tax. Not true. Because of what the law says and what Lori's talking about is registering as a foreign entity. You have to register your LLC in any state where you are actively engaged in business. Each state defines that a little bit differently. But when you register it, you're paying $150, $200, $250 a year in every single one of those states, plus the state where you formed it. There are some reasons to form a Delaware LLC, but it's not tax related. It's mainly because Delaware is considered kind of a neutral jurisdiction and people from all across the country are familiar with Delaware law, and so they're more comfortable. If we formed a Delaware LLC for a client whose business is in Arkansas, we're going to have to pay franchise taxes in Delaware, and we're going to have to pay franchise taxes in Arkansas. And so typically, my advice is you should form the LLC where the business is going to be located. It's going to cut down on the filings that you have to make, the filing fees that you have to make. There are times to do Delaware, like if we formed a company that was going to have investors from 5 different states, they may say, we don't know Arkansas law, so we want you to be Delaware because we're all familiar with Delaware. But that's a unique circumstance and a unique scenario.
Chad, I'm sorry, Cal, here's another question that I think would be good for you. Araceli asked, when applying for the certificate of organization for LLCs, we were asked to add 1 incorporator, organizer, and 1 member. If I added a member as incorporator organizer, does that mean they are not considered an owner member with the Secretary of State?
So I think the short answer to that is the same person can be all of those things. So I can, even if you're the only owner, you can be the incorporator, and then you can also list yourself as a member or manager. This is something that I get in a fight with the Secretary of State's office about because the law does not actually require us to list any of those things. The Secretary of State is just making us do it because they want to. But I mean, if you list someone as a manager or a member on that filing, then you are basically creating a presumption that they are a member or a manager. And so I wouldn't just add somebody there just to add someone there. But again, like if you're the only person involved in the business, you can be the incorporator, the member, the manager. You can list the same person for all 3 of those. But for whatever reason, the Secretary of State requires you to list 2 people or at least titles that are involved. They say it's because people form LLCs, or I say They say it's because attorneys form LLCs, list their name on there, even though they're not an owner of the business. And then whenever that LLC doesn't pay their franchise taxes, the Secretary of State doesn't know who to go after. They have no way of knowing who is actually responsible for it. And if they ask us, we're going to say that's confidential information and we're not telling you. So that's what they've done, is they're now requiring you to list someone who's actually involved with the business. It's not required by the law, it's just something they're doing. But you can list the same person. You don't have to list everyone. But if you list someone in there, you're basically telling under penalty of perjury to the Secretary of State that that person is a member or that person is a manager. So you don't want to just, haphazardly just start listing people just to get the form through.
Right. And Jessica asked, what is the difference between an LLC and a PLLC? The businesses will be primarily architectural services.
By the way, I guess I'm just keeping it back here. I don't know if I should be up there, but there's not really a difference other than one. Any type of business that is engaged in a professional service, architecture, doctors, law, CPAs, they are required to form either a PLLC or a professional organization that is limited to that profession. And it's for two reasons. One, we have laws. Let's just take the law firm example. We have laws on the legal profession side that say the only person who can be an owner of a law firm is someone who's licensed to be a lawyer. So there are separate laws that apply to PLLCs that say, one, if you're engaged in this type of activity, you have to be a PLLC. And then there's another subset of laws within PLLC statutes that say all owners, officers, directors, managers, whatever, of that PLLC have to be appropriately licensed in that profession. Another reason is because PLLC statutes carve out an additional exception for malpractice. So we've talked about how if you're an owner, you're an officer, your personal assets aren't at risk. You can't be personally sued for something that the business does. But if I commit malpractice as a lawyer, or if your doctor commits malpractice, you can sue them personally, even though they did it through an entity. And so there are some exceptions. And it talks about malpractice, some of the statutes, but the short answer is that everything else we talked about today, there's no difference. It's just that if you are doing a service that is professionally licensed, the law requires you to do it through a PLLC, and it requires everyone who is an owner of that business to be licensed in that profession. There's some exceptions to that, but
I have one question real quick. If you own multiple LLCs, I've heard that sometimes it's worth considering like a parent company or holding company. When would you go for that, or is it worth it, or what do you need to consider when thinking?
yeah, I mean, there's not like a one answer to that. It creates a lot of flexibility. Having a parent company makes it easier from an accounting standpoint, financial reporting standpoint. If you have a parent company with subsidiaries underneath, all of the financials can run up to the parent company. So you can create a picture financially of what the entire kind of family of organizations looks like. If you don't have a parent company sitting on top, you can't really do that. In that case, you just have 4 separate companies that are not interrelated. And the reason why a lot of people do that is there's some flexibility. One's liability protection. We see this a lot with doctors, do the people who get sued a lot, tractor trailer operators. What they will do is they will put all of their equipment in one LLC. And that LLC does not engage in any activity. All they do is rent their equipment to one of their other companies. That company engages in the services. If they get sued for something that happens over here, they have a wreck, they commit, malpractice, medical malpractice, whatever. The entity that gets sued is the one doing the services. That entity doesn't have any assets. The assets are owned over here. So in some ways, it can be a liability protection structure. In other situations, you may have 3 or 4 products or services that are all related, but there may be business reasons to keep them separate. You may, for instance, you may have like all the intellectual property of a company housed in one company. You may have like the services in another. You may have management or HR and other things over here. And the reason why clients do that sometimes is they may say, hey, if somebody wants to come in and buy my company, they're only going to want to buy the intellectual property. They're not going to want to buy my services. They're not going to want to buy this stuff or this stuff over here. And if it were all aggregated into one company, it makes it really hard to just sell off bits and pieces in an easy way. You can do it. It's a little bit more complicated. So by separating all those out, you could say, okay, hey, I'm going to sell this one. I still have all of these. I sold this company. It was in a standalone box and we were able to sell it. Same thing with investors, right? So sometimes investors may say, hey, we really like the intellectual property. We want to invest in this, and then we want to license it out to other people. We don't really care about these contracts you have with the 4 bike shops in Fayetteville that you're servicing. We see that really more as a pain or a hassle. We don't want any of that. We want your intellectual property. That's what we're going to invest in. And so by separating those things out, you have more flexibility in kind of how you and what you do with those companies moving forward. It's also an administrative hassle. And we kind of talked about piercing the corporate veil. If you don't respect the separateness of the entity from yourself, a court could say you don't have limited liability. That same concept applies to multiple LLCs. If you don't have separate bank accounts for all of those LLCs and separate documents and separate employees, if you're sharing employees, if there's not contracts, if it's not all done correctly, and what a court is going to say is these aren't 4 different companies, these are one. And the assets over here will be available to your creditors over here. And so anytime we have that conversation with clients, you kind of have to, it's a flexibility. It's almost like a seesaw. It's like the more flexibility you get, the more administrative burden you have. And if you are the type of person who is not going to keep up with the administrative burden and do all of those things, then all of the benefits we've created go out the window. We've just created more legal fees and more accounting fees and franchise tax fees. And so you see it a lot with like real estate too. Like people want to put each real estate project in a separate entity. Rental houses, you may put 3 in one LLC, 3 over here. And it's theoretically because if a renter at one of those buildings gets hurt and sues you, they can't go after all of your other properties. So a lot of different reasons to do it, but still keep in mind, if you're looking at doing, that type of structure, you got to have separate bank accounts. If you're sharing assets, sharing employees, you really need to have a process for documenting who's paying what, how those costs are shared. We would put document like an employee leasing or an employee sharing agreement or something like that. So, you still have to run each of those 4 businesses as completely separate legal entities, or else all you've done is created a headache. It's public, so I can say it's probably the lawsuit that has taken the most time and the most resources and has cost the most. Is we had a client that had somewhere in the range of 30 to 40 LLCs and corporations. They had retail locations all over the country, and they would set up each retail location in its own LLC. And what made it even more confusing is there was like a group of 3 or 4 people, and they'd say, hey, we're going to be 50-50 in this one, but over here, I'm going to own 80% of this one, and you're going to own 25. So they had different ownership of each one of them, but they didn't actually run them as separate entities. It was all just things were flowing all over the place. It was like 4 years of litigation that didn't even go to trial. It was just 4 years of us like trying to negotiate a settlement of how to unwind all of that. And the argument that our attorneys used, which the court agreed with, is that this was not 40 LLCs, this was one partnership. You know, we talked earlier about how you don't want to be a partnership, you don't want to be liable for everything else. The court said, all this is all just basically a farce. This is just one partnership across 40 different locations with different, all this different stuff. But it made it, that's one of those where like having no documents probably would have been better than having 40 sets of documents that didn't actually like align with what they would do.
Julie, are you gonna come through the?
Yeah, we have a couple of others. Let's see. Jessica had a question for Alicia, asking about do's and don'ts of receiving monetary gifts from family for business startup.
Yeah, you can definitely receive gifts from family, but we may ask for documentation that is not a loan to be repaid back. And then it's a good practice to have it in your bank account at least 2 or 3 months prior. And so as you're providing your bank statements to the SBA, like that's money that you've had for a couple of months, it's not just coming in. And so best practice there is to go ahead and get it at least 3 months in advance and put it in your business account. And then other than that, just make sure that it's not a loan and be able to answer that accurately and provide documentation from the giver if needed.
Great, thank you. And then Guy has a question. Do you pay franchise fee for all the LLCs under one parent company?
Yeah, yes. Every single entity pays $150 every year.
Was there anything else?
It looks like Murali asked, what is the SBA 504 loan? Can you please explain again? I know that's going to be in the materials, but if Alicia wants to just touch on that.
Yeah. So the SBA 504 loan is mostly used for real estate. And so if you have a ground up construction, for example, that's the one I'm closing on Friday. So it's a ground up construction. And so that's tangible real estate. So all the money is going to be used for that. And then once it's built, the SBA will actually pay off a portion of that to Arvest. And so the end result is you will have 2 different loans, like one to the bank and one to the SBA. And so the benefits of that is you can have a long-term fixed rate on that up to an amortization up to 25 years. And then you also have very attractive rates through, they're called CDCs like Arkansas Capital and RMI on that. It's a long-term fixed rate. And so typically see that on ground up construction and anything involving real estate where we don't have to take intangibles. So if you're purchasing a business and you have enough cash to cover the intangibles on that, a 504 is a good product that can get you better terms than the 7A.
Great. Any more questions from those who are still with us? Okay, so if not, that will be the end of our presentation. We'd like to thank you for joining us for the workshop. Thanks so much to both Cal and Alicia for their information and great presentations. We will be providing the deck for you, and so that will come to you via email, and that way you can go back through and review. And then also the video will be on the website within the next 48 hours or so. So you can go back at your leisure and take a look at everything. One thing I like to say is if you have very specific questions and you're not a client of the center here in Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas, go on our website at sbtdc.uart.edu and sign up to get a consultation. If you are outside the area, there's a center anywhere in Arkansas close to where you may be located. And so just you can go to asbtdc.org and see the statewide map and determine the best center for you. And they will be happy to sign you up and help you. So if there are no more questions and we've wrapped up with all three of our presenters, we'll say thank you for coming and we will see you next time, hopefully.
Thanks, Julie.
Bye-bye.